One day, around 10 years ago, 8-year-old me spotted a few older kids playing a game on the computers at a public library. The game in question was on Roblox. I remember them scrolling down the old website and playing some sort of zombie defense game. Instantly, I was hooked. It wasn't long before I spent a great deal of time playing as a guest before eventually making my account sometime in 2013. And I mean, I played many games. Welcome to Roblox Building, Crossroads, Sword Fight on the Heights, Paintball, Call of Robloxia 5, Zombie Tower, Welcome to Town of Robloxia, etc., etc. I had many fond memories as a young child playing these games. It was, in a way, an easy way to play cheap bootlegs of actual games that existed. It wasn't until a year or so later that I would eventually discover Roblox Studio, the engine used to create all these games I had played so much. I started to make a lot of free model trash, like a lot of really bad games, although I started learning how to script over time. You can actually see me here scripting on my old laptop as a kid, probably on some really easy property changing part. Unfortunately, everything kind of stopped here. I lost my passion to learn how to make games or program in general. I became a kid who was much more obsessed with playing video games rather than making them, because that was, of course, hard. I had many projects that were started, yet never finished. And to be honest, that's kind of ate away at me for years now, like not just in something as silly as Roblox, but actually in general. I mean, I missed a lot of great opportunity in the past because I was too scared to go outside of my comfort zone. Only in the past year or so am I really changing that at all. So I decided, why not do what I always wanted to do as a kid? Create and script a fully functioning game in Roblox. Now, learning was a bit easier for me because I do have a little bit of coding experience. I mean, I did some Unity projects here and there, some Roblox things, and even a year of high school Python where we only got up to object-oriented programming and barely. But not to downplay anything, due to the knowledge of some fundamentals, I had a much easier time with the syntax barrier. I learned from the tutorials of Alvin Blocks and the Dev King before I started everything, including the quote-unquote advanced and GUI tutorials. So good! Now I'm apparently a good scripter who can make any game I want to, right? Anyway, I forgot to mention that after my first day of watching beginner tutorials, I made this little squares game. It has a simple loop that teleports players to the squares and then picks a random square that everyone must go to. It also has a timer that I didn't really understand how to make and kind of just copied from a tutorial. Oh well, I understand it more now than I did then. The entire game's purpose was as a landmark to see how much I would improve over however long it would take to make my first project. In terms of the project itself, it wasn't too hard to come up with an idea. I decided a good project that was simple enough to create was a game where players race to the end of a map and a group of winners get rewarded. I liked the idea after seeing it on Alvin Blocks' old games video because I believe the project wasn't too large or difficult to create while also being enough to feel like a complete game that I could be proud of. I began by building a lobby. Going into this, I didn't watch any tutorials on how to build or model, so I was essentially trying to make something from my knowledge as a 10-year-old. All I have to say is, the entire building process was pretty slow and painful. Included in the lobby was a lobby obby, as I called it, and also one of those dumb ball pits that they always put in there. At this point, I also made a couple badges for the game. I created a badge that would be awarded to players when they joined the game, as well as a badge for players who completed the lobby obby. Simple stuff, and I was enjoying working with Lua. I also added leader stats and a data store, which are always fun to script in my opinion. Just like the lobby, making the maps themselves was difficult and painful for me to do. I started out with this forest map that I designed to be good for beginner players, kind of an introduction map, you know? There was an attempt at making some sort of tree model and it really sucked, but I decided to use it anyway. I also learned a tiny bit about velocity as I looked at Roblox's documentation in order to make this river thing. Later on, I made this rolling log idea that was kind of cool, but also jank. The map overall was a bit too large and spread out, although it's fine. In between making the first and second map, I decided to make a round system that would randomly choose one of the two. This was one of the more messy and difficult scripts I made, although it was nothing too bad. I learned how to make a proper timer to pair with this so that the players could see the game status. For my second and last map of the game, I came up with this beach idea. I wanted to make the player run through a fort while pirates shot at them. It was again difficult to build, but I enjoyed it for the most part. Here I made a scene as if the pirates had shot into the fort with a collapsed table and toppled chairs. I also added this little killing script that would light the player on fire when it killed them. Making the pirate ship shoot was actually pretty difficult because I didn't understand velocity mechanics in Studio yet. I kind of brute forced my way into sort of learning it with mixed success. The cannonball that it shoots will also explode on contact with anything. Creating the GUI was a bit difficult. I hate that the size of images is set by offset by default rather than scale, as I wanted this game to work on all screens. I decided to add a simple shop in order to encourage replayability through an in-game currency and items while also adding some game passes. These game passes, by the way, gave me a lot of trouble. If I understand correctly from what I would eventually learn, game passes bought in-game don't apply until a player rejoins the server. I think? I was unable to give players their items at first because their data would return false in terms of owning the game pass. To resolve this, I made a table for each player that would let a function know if they owned an item that they just bought. This table would obviously be saved and indexed again when the player respawned. This way they could keep their items. Eventually, it was time to add the sounds. This made the game much more lively and I began to realize how close I was to finishing. My game now had multiple maps, a round system, badges, an all-right storefront, and a soundtrack. All I had left to do at this point was create a way for players to win and script a couple tools for the shop. In order to reward players, I added this visible zone for them to run through. Upon touching the part, a script checks how many players it is rewarded. If it has rewarded no players, the player gets a win and 500 cash. If it has rewarded a player, but it can still reward more, then it simply rewards 100 cash. If the maximum amount of players has been rewarded, the part turns red and becomes untouchable. Players are also added to a table upon touching the part so that they cannot be rewarded multiple times. But how many players do I reward? Well, I decided for the game to calculate the number of players in the game at the start of each round. Then, that number gets divided by 3 so that only the top third of players can get rewarded. It was a bit finicky, but eventually I was able to get the script to work. The final feature to add to the game was a couple tools. I made a basic sprinting tool for the standard store as well as a push tool as a game pass. Unfortunately, I copied this pushing tool from an Alvin Blocks video because I really had no idea how the newer velocity mechanics work. There are very few tutorials on it and I don't really know where to look for good information. Even the documentation is a bit weird to read. If anybody has suggestions for learning these mechanics, please let me know. Many of my future projects require the usage of velocity and I don't want to use the deprecated velocity property. But aside from that, after a couple spread out weeks of work, seriously, I was incredibly busy this past month, the first version of my game was complete. All I had left to do was create a simple icon and some thumbnails, and it was time to upload the game publicly. Here's a bit of gameplay of the game. It's definitely rough in places, and will need some fixes, but I just wanted to document the first version of this game since I'm happy with its release. Thank you for sticking along if you're still here, and the link to the game will be in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.